Greetings from Snake Mountain Boatworks on Tuesday, September 12, 2021. Here's a kind of an in-detail update on Songbird, our other 1948 18-foot Century Seamaid. She is ready to flip. Her owners have requested that we finish the bottom work first before we consider next steps on the above the water line. So I thought I would spend a few minutes walking around her hull and pointing out some things, anticipating and answering some questions that we get fairly regularly. The first has to do with the screw holes that are left after we pull all the fasteners and remove all the hardware. I did most of this, Rick did a bunch of it, and what I discovered, particularly with the rub rails, the rails on the splash rails, the vents, both on the transom and on the aft deck, where there are 4 of them, pretty much all over, I found that many of these screws were no longer biting into the wood. They just spun out, or I had to take needle nose pliers and extract them because spinning them wouldn't bring them out to me. Now, if we take an example like right here, you can see that this step pad has been moved around a little bit, and this hole is incredibly enlarged. Now, I've gotten a myriad of questions about how to deal with this. What can I just use the next size up screw? In this case, the step pads were secured with number 8, about 3/4 inch, maybe 1 inch screws. So the question I would get, can I just go to a number 10 and go to 1.5 inches and screw them in and everything will be fine? No, particularly on something like a step pad or a piece of deck hardware. Your screw head sinks into a countersink. You jump from an 8 to a 10, and that head is going to stand proud of whatever the piece of hardware is. Secondly, you're already just about penetrating all the way through the wood with a 1 inch screw that was in there initially. Why go to 1.5 inches? All you do is have a very sharp point of a screw penetrating through. And if anybody ever, let's say, tried to take that piece of ceiling off and reached up in there unwittingly, they could rake their skin with those screw points. No. The answer is toothpicks and Gorilla Glue. You dip a series of toothpicks, hardwood, ash, or maple toothpicks, and if you go to our website, click on How To, click on Materials and Sources. The materials we use and their sources are all available right there. So the toothpicks, in this hole, I would guess we would end up putting 5 or 6 toothpicks, and with Gorilla Glue, and let that cure. It'll foam up, and you just carefully, if you're not going to redo this surface, you just carefully, with a utility knife or a Japanese cabinet maker saw, you just trim them off so that they are flush. Now you've got fresh wood. When it comes time to reinstall, let's say, this step pad, You drill new pilot holes, use the same size screws, and you're good to go. As we look at this hull, we see a number of other things. One, see this seam line? See how the Sikaflex or whatever was used here has totally failed? This means water's getting down in there. And in fact, this seam has broken. This deck section is now, for some reason, and we could only discover why by stripping it and getting down in here, this is proud of this. So as a result, it's all broken away. It's all broken away here. In fact, as we look at much of this deck, we find that the Sikaflex has failed. Now here's a excellent example. This part of the deck has heaved and broken it away. So in this case, our recommendation, this whole section of Sikaflex is actually convex and standing about, a 1/16 of an inch or more above the deck, and that's because this board is about a 1/16 of an inch above this board. This one has a big hollow in it, and this one has a big hump in it. When we find the deck Sikaflex seams in these kinds of conditions, we recommend that, not just for cosmetic purposes, as many people suspect, but really as for survival purposes, for combating rot. This is no longer doing that. Remember, these seams are not just decoration. These decks are done with planks that are, I'm not familiar enough with. Oh, I can see it here. All right, this is one plank. This is one plank. You can see the seam between the two planks right here. So this is a fake seam. It's just routed into the plank. These two are both fake seams. And you notice that the fake seams show no cracking. That's because there's no movement. They're just routed grooves in a single piece of board. But look at this one, and look at this one, and look at this one. So these guys, this plank has moved around. I mean, a boat's going to move on the water. This one's moved around, and over time, you get this crazing, these cracks. Well, these two seams are functional. They're waterproofing, because if they're not there, water gets on the deck. This is just a simple lap seam, lap joint. Water is going to work underneath, and guess what? The rot begins. We would toothpick all of these holes for the hinges, the hatch door hinges. Another thing to look at is, you noticed, I call these zebra stripes. Here's a seam, here's a seam, here's a seam. Notice how they're all dark compared to what's next to them? That tells us that the varnish has begun failing. And it's time, because again, these seams are only as good as the coat of varnish that is over them. And when you start getting these zebra stripes, that's telling us that moisture has begun infiltrating. In this case, this is not serious, it's not severe, but it has begun. Here's a spot where this varnish is pretty well shot. Pretty well shot. This little bit of haze, it's just beginning. I would guess, feeling these two bungs, both of them are proud of this surface, so they've begun popping. Moisture can get in there and penetrates down in, moves along this seam, and again, the rot begins. So, I would also point out, here's the covering board and the matching covering board on the foredeck, and this seam. There's another place where things move a lot, and you can see these cracks. At present, they're primarily cosmetic, but in time, if you remember the other Seamaid, Winnie, Joe's had to do a series of Dutchman because moisture, which has begun penetrating here, penetrated to the point where we had some soft wood at this forward end and both aft ends of that boat's covering boards. So, similarly, you can see, I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. Looks like somebody tried to fill these holes with, I don't know, that's not just in the surface. Oh, maybe it is. Yeah, somebody tried to waterproof. This isn't doing anything other than forcing the cutwater away from the wood. That's not your goal. Your goal is to keep water from penetrating there. We just use a sealing compound, dolphinite. We dip each screw in and drive it home, spin it home, and the dolphinite fills that void and provides the seal that you want. So we will flip Songbird over now and begin working on her bottom. We will take the entire bottom off and see what we have behind it. And we're pretty much expecting that we'll put a 5200 bottom on it. We will take you through that process in great detail as we do. In the meantime, this is our update on our 1948 18-foot Century Seamaid Songbird. Thank you so much. Bye-bye for now from Snake Mountain Boatworks.